Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, That Model Railway Guy, for another update from the Modular Model Railway. This episode is once again sponsored by both D-Rail's Model Shop and L-Cut Creative, who I'll be talking more about later on in this episode. Now, last time out, I pretty much completed the yard module. I may add a few extra details in at a later date, but it's mostly exhibition ready at this point. And so now we turn our attention to the station module. Along with the yard, this is pretty much the focal point of the entire layout, so it needs to look good. But luckily, I have some of the key elements in place already. Here is the station module in its current state, and you'll notice the platforms have been constructed, the track is ballasted, and the main buildings for the station are roughly in position too. All of this now just needs more scenery around it to really bring the scene together. As with the yard module, I'm going to start at the back first with the area beside the main station building, and most of this is going to become a car park for the railway. Again, I'm going to build up the land with foam board so that it comes up to the same height as the platform. The foam board has been cut to size, and then this is just simply glued in place. There is a very small gap at the end of the module, but this was easily filled with a small offcut. You may notice I have another module connected here, as I discovered this helps support the end plate when you're adding these initial scenic structures. Otherwise, the end plate bows out slightly, and when you join the modules together, you get a noticeable gap. I then started gluing some formers in place, and this is so that the scenery syncs up with the end plate of the module before coming down to the level of the car park. And this is then all covered in plaster bandage as an initial surface. As the land rises up to the station building, the steps in the foam board are quite obvious here, so I'll smooth these out by draping the plaster bandage strips over these too. On the yard module I used filler to hide these, but it did require a lot of work, so I'm hoping to alleviate some of that here by creating a little bit of an initial slope. It's still a bit steep though, so I will be coming back later on to add a bit of filler over the top of this just to tidy it up. Speaking of the yard, the other end of the station module needs to join onto this, so the land height has to match. Again, more foam board is installed, and the end plate acts as a nice guide to getting the height correct. I need to create a ramp down here as well as the land falls away from the station building, so I've just glued in a couple of pieces of mount board as a support. Another section of foam board is then added over the top of this to create a much more gradual descent. Filler is then added all over the hill to create a smoother, less bumpy surface. And as I mentioned before, the same is done to the car park as well, just to tidy up those height changes. When it comes to the platforms, the sides that face the track have some nice embossed plasticard on them to cover up the internal foam board structure. Round the back though, this isn't the case, so I've cut some more strips of plasticard, and these can be slotted in place with a bit of glue down the back. Obviously this is unlikely to be seen much as it actually faces away from the front of the layout and is hidden behind the rest of the platform. But it's good to know it's there, especially if I ever want to film the layout from odd angles in the future. With these now in place, I can add a walkway along the length of the car park too, and again I've used several sections of plasticard to create this. And at the very end, I've cut the plasticard strip in such a way that it matches the geometry of the station building. Additionally, I've also created a second section which wraps around the building too, as I'm imagining this is where most people will enter the railway. With these key elements in place, I can then start painting all of the surrounding surfaces in a coat of grey paint. This is really just a base coat that'll be hidden under the scenic layers that go on top of this, but it's good practice to do this anyway, just so that the white of the material underneath doesn't show through if there are any gaps. While I have some grey paint mixed up, I'm also taking this opportunity to touch up the back of the platform. When the plasticard strips were installed along the rear, I added a little bit of filler just to disguise the join, so that's what I'm covering up here. The only section that isn't being covered in grey is the little hill at the very end of the module, which is getting a brown base coat to act as a dirt layer. The same is also done for a little strip along the back of the car park, which I want to be a little grassy area too, just so this section of the module doesn't become too grey and bleak. Because I've used acrylic paints here, it all dried relatively quickly, so it wasn't long before I was able to add the actual surface for the car park. Again, I want this to match up to the surface on the yard module, so once again I'll be using the Geoscenics Pothole Road Kit. You can see I've added a general layer of PVA glue already, and now I'm just using a smaller brush to get in and around all of the pavements. The road powder is then sprinkled over the top. Even though this powder is already really fine, I do find that using a small sieve when adding it to the layout helps get a more consistent and even covering. With all the powder added, it's then given a quick spray of water. And then finally, the glue solution is added over the top to fix it all in place. This is the usual 50-50 mix of PVA and water, with a drop of washing up liquid mixed in too, just to break the surface tension. The glue did seem a little bit thicker than usual, so maybe my ratios were a little bit off, but that said, it was still quite runny, and I did have to strengthen some of the masking tape along the edges. As you can see, it's going down fine, it just now needs plenty of time to dry. While the glue dries on that, it's time to thank D-Rails Model Shop, who have very kindly sponsored this series. As I'm sure you guys know by now, I'm a big fan of D-Rails and how they treat their customers. Now that the vast majority of model shops have moved online, it's nice to know that if you do have a question or an issue, you can get in contact with the guys at D-Rails and they'll be more than happy to help you out. If you're new to modelling as well, they also have a page on their website that gives you some handy hints on where to start and the sort of products that you might want to try out. You can find that at drails.co.uk, head to the Scenery and Buildings tab and there's a little drop down menu that leads you to it. So thanks again to D-Rails for sponsoring this episode and the entire series. Like I've said in the past, I personally use them all the time and I highly recommend them as a model shop you should check out in the future too. And now let's get back to the layout and see how the car park is getting on. Now that the glue has dried on the surface, these are the results, and I'm really pleased with how this surface has turned out. I'm just removing the masking tape here that I used as a barrier to stop it all falling over the edge, and it's a really nice clean edge too. Of course, the main thing here is whether this surface matches up to the yard module, and so putting the two together, you can see that it's almost a seamless result. I'm really happy with that, and hopefully it's not too obvious that these are separate modules when you're looking at the overall layout. I'm going to continue this fence line along the back of the module as well, just to make it even more seamless. As before, the posts on the fence can just be poked down into the foam board and held in place with a little bit of glue. Now you can see there is quite a big gap along the bottom where the land slopes up quite steeply, but don't worry, I have a plan to address this later on. At the other end of the module, I'm using more of the flexible dry stone walling that I've used in previous episodes. Using this in multiple areas of the layout just ties all the modules together to give them a consistent theme. Now I did have a bit of a gap along the back where I ran out of both the fencing and the dry stone wall sections. Luckily, I had another type of fencing to fill this in, and actually I feel like this is the sort of patchwork solution you would see in reality too. In addition to the fences and wall, I'm also creating some dirt verges as well. You'll have seen me do this in the previous episode next to the track, but it also works well alongside roads or pathways too, and as always I'm starting off by putting down a layer of PVA glue. Dirt dust is then sprinkled over the top, and like I've said before, this is dried out dirt from the garden, sieved down to a very fine grade. You can see I've also created a little pathway up the side of the hill too, which should sync up to a similar pathway I have on my buffer stop module for end-to-end running. More PVA glue is then added over all of the areas painted in brown, ready for the application of static grass. The base layer is added first, and you'll have seen in my other videos I always like to go with the 2mm summer grass from War World Scenics for this. Just as a reminder, I've put a referral link for WWS down in the description that allows you to earn some loyalty points with them should you want to try out any of their products yourself. With the base layer down, any excess that hasn't fallen in the glue can just be cleaned up and saved for reuse later on. And I need to make sure I hoover the grass off the top of the walls as well. Obviously, the advantage in putting the walls in first is that they can sit directly on the surface and the grass can then blend in the join. Once the base layer of static grass is added, a second longer layer can now be added over the top. For this I use the WWS layering spray. This will allow the grass fibres to stick to each other, but it dries completely clear. 4mm spring grass is the next layer I like to add, and this not only has the advantage of making the grass look a little longer, but it also introduces some nice variation in colour too. The same process is carried out on the other section by the car park as well. You can see I'm just using a piece of card to protect the wall from overspray, and this is so that the fibres don't get stuck to it when they're dropped over the area. Don't forget, if you want to be the first to see more progress on the layout, then you can get early access to all the new episodes in this series by becoming a channel member. The next episode is actually already available to watch over in the members area, in addition to exclusive videos that are only available for members. If you want to see all the different perks on offer, then just click that join button below this video. It doesn't sign you up straight away or anything, it just shows you what you get at each different level. The cheapest one is just £1.99, so as I always say, it's less than the price of a coffee, and I like to think you get more enjoyment out of it too. In the meantime, I've started painting the white lines for the station car park. For this, I've created a really basic template out of some masking tape, which is just stuck down on the surface in position. I then use a sponge to dab white paint into the gaps to create two nice white lines. Using a sponge should give the lines a little bit of extra texture, but it also introduces some natural imperfections too, which adds a little bit of realism. The template is then removed, and now you can see the result. There is a little bit of overspill at the end of one line here. That's a bit too much of an imperfection for my liking, but if you're careful, this can just be wiped away while the paint is still wet. Another bonus point to mention is that the white acrylic paint fades as it dries, which makes it less bright, giving the appearance that it's slightly weathered. So to judge where the next set of lines should be, I'm just using this model car to gauge the distance. The template is then put in place and the process can be repeated. It's a really nice simple effect, and again these white lines are a little modern touch to remind the viewer that this is a heritage railway in a present day setting. You can see the back half of this module is coming along really nicely now, but there are little touch-ups to be added here and there. The fencing still has that nasty gap underneath it where the land changes height, so I'm going to add a bit of PVA along the bottom of this. Large sections of clump foliage can then be added to the glue, which will disguise the gap, and this is a nice scenic touch too. In fact, as I quite like this effect, I'm going to continue it along the entire fence just so that it's not an isolated bush. Instead it'll be more like a line of weeds and bushes that have grown along the fence line over the years. Here there's a little gap between the two fence panels. This is only about 1 millimeter or something, but I'll use the same technique again and spread a bit of glue up the fence itself. And this time I'll use some fine leaf foliage for a bit of variation. There was also a gap between the end of the dry stone walling and the other type of fencing I used, but again PVA can easily be added for the space to be filled in with yet more foliage. While originally it was intended as a way to hide the gap, it's actually become a really nice little scenic feature where it looks like the bush is growing up around the fence. Gradually I work my way along the back of the module until I get to the little grass area behind the car park. Again, I'm adding more foliage here just so it doesn't look too perfect. After all, weeds and little bushes have a habit of springing up everywhere. So, those of you who have been paying attention will notice there's something pretty major missing from my station, but I'm going to fix that now with some help from Cut Creative, who are also the second sponsor for this video. I'm really happy that they've come on board again, and those of you who have been watching for a while will have known I had the pleasure of using their laser cut kits on previous layouts I've built too. In my opinion, the stuff they make is just really nice, and I'll be honest, the instructions they provide are really good and detailed, to the point that even an idiot like me can follow them. They have a great variety of buildings and structures on offer too, so signal boxes, station buildings, platforms, sheds. They cover all the major scales as well, so N, O gauge, O gauge. You can head over to their website lcut.co.uk to see the full range. And actually, it was when I was on their website that I came across the kit I'm about to use now. So what I've built up from Lcut is this really nice LMS style footbridge kit, and this will sit here on the platforms. After all, with the station having 2 platforms, I really do need a way for the passengers to be able to get from one to the other. I absolutely love the amount of detail on this kit, especially the lattice work, but as intricate as the bridge looks, it was actually a really easy kit to put together. I've also modified it slightly too, as it was just a little bit too wide for my platforms, so I removed one of the spans from the centre. There's also the marks on the steps where I've cut them from the sprue. They need touching up as well, but generally this is a really nice kit. Another detail I want to add to the platform is some Midland style fencing too. Now I've always liked this type of fencing, so I built up several sections with the intention of attaching this along the entire length of the platform. The easiest way I found to do this was just to add some glue along the rear edge of the platform. The fence itself can then just sit down into this, and it's already starting to look the part. Up by the station building, I've added in a couple of gates as well, as I imagine this is where visitors to the station will enter if the booking office is closed. And at the very end of the platform, I've used a part of the kit that was specially designed for use on the ramps, and this looks really good. I've also added this at the other end of the platform too. This is actually on the yard module, but I wanted to get the fence sections to match up as much as possible, so I figured it was best to do it all at the same time. With everything said and done though, the full length of fencing looks really good along the entire back of the platform. There's lots more scope for adding more detail along here, but for now this is a great start. And of course the footbridge can be put back in place too, and you can really see how the scene is starting to come together. As usual, I'll finish up by running a train into the platform, and today it's the Bachmann J72, or rather the E1 in this livery. It's hauling a rake of Mark I coaches, and while it would never have run with these in service, it is indicative of something you would see on a heritage railway today. I think it looks absolutely great in the station though, especially with that car park just in the background and the scenic break that is created by the walling along the back too. Really, I just can't wait to get a back scene behind all of this to really extend the scene behind the railway, but that's a video for another day. In the meantime, there's still a lot of work to do on this module. After all, the whole section in front of platform 2 still needs to be done, and I've got some ideas for that. And like I said before, I want to do a lot of detailing around the station to really bring it to life, just like I did with the yard. These two modules really are the focal point of the layout, and so while my plans are ambitious, I definitely think it'll be worth it. That'll all be in the next episode, though don't forget if you're a channel member, that's available to watch right now, and here's a little teaser of what's coming up. I have a go at modelling mud, an embankment needs to be built, and I reveal the station's name.